Everybody's favorite, the Necromancer, has been turning heads ever since it was released in beta, and people have been actually had a chance to play it out, or maybe you haven't played it out. Maybe you've seen some gameplay on the internet, or maybe you haven't checked it at all, and this is for you, this video, and probably for everybody else as well, wondering if Necromancer would be a good, maybe the best class for them to play in Diablo 4, and best not necessarily by the numbers, because numbers are getting changed, but in terms of playstyle, fantasy, and what it can actually do. Necromancer is definitely a fan favorite for a lot of people and has undergone a lot of changes from its Diablo 2 days to Diablo 3 days to what it is now. We're skipping one game. I cannot remember if it was an important game. That's probably going to come back to me if it's important. But what the Necromancer kind of does now is a combination of past versions of it, and I think it's definitely doing them better. You have the bone style playstyles with the bone abilities. You have blood, which Diablo 3 introduced into the game, and let's be honest, they're pretty freaking cool. Shadow abilities, which are a combination of different styles and some things swiped, taken from the Witch Doctor of Diablo 3, which let's say I don't particularly mind. Of course, summons is definitely something that Necromancer is very famous for and has actually changed again in Diablo 4 since Diablo 3 reintroduced the way skeletons are basically used and built into. Now that's even more expanded in a much cooler way, I think. We'll see. And last but not least, curses and corpses. Curses are fewer in between as opposed to Diablo 2, and Diablo 3 kind of had curses, but not in the way that Diablo 2 had them, and we'll see exactly how they operate now. And corpses are, the corpse explosions, the things that interact with corpses, which is something that Necromancer is very famous for and has probably one of the best skills in the game. Corpse explosion, no bias. But that's all fine and dandy. Let's take a look at what is actual core to the Necromancer, and not actual core, but basic skills are the generators. Starting with bone splinters, fairly obvious, fairly straightforward. I think these are supposed to be kind of the replacements of teeth from Diablo 2. It's bone splinters, it's fine, you get it. Hemorrhage is the blood ability, which is okay, it's kind of cool. Hey, listen, the blood theme is all nice and you should definitely try it out. Going into the Shadow Realm, where some of them, spoiler alert, might work with your summons really well. Decompose and Reap are two kind of new abilities, but not really. Reap is something that you might have seen in the past, specifically in Heroes of the Storm as well, where you slash an ethereal sight in melee range and just slap AoE damage around you, which actually is really cool, and hopefully will build in the endgame, and I think it will, into a melee Necromancer theme, which Diablo 2 tried to bridge, but didn't really manage to do it with the poison dagger style abilities and playstyle. But now, that's looking to be a little better. And speaking of better, core skills are what's going to consume your essence, which is your resource of choice for your class. Blight is what I mentioned before. It's a shadow ability that consumes your essence, and it has a lot of importance. One particular one that lets your summons deal more damage, which is something that you might be thinking of when you're building your Necromancer. Sever is really cool, also strangely reminiscent of Heroes of the Storm's Necromancer Zul, where you throw scythes around and they essentially come back and just do a lot of damage. It's really cool. Blood Surge and Blood Lance are the blood abilities, which, consume also essence. Blood Surge is an interesting ability where you draw blood from enemies, dealing your damage, and then you expel the blood in a Blood Nova, which we've seen a lot in Diablo 3, and it deals more damage. This, of course, needs to be heavily augmented by your passives. Blood Lance is something that we kinda know. It would probably be the replacement of Corpse Lance from Diablo 3 if you've played the Necromancer in Diablo 3. Obviously, you have a bunch of augments as well that makes this even cooler. And let's not forget the Bone Spear. We cannot have an essence consumer or a resource consumer, because in Diablo 2 you don't have essence. Bone Spear is very core, unique to the Necromancer, and I don't think it's ever gonna go away, and I hope it doesn't. It looks good, it feels good, it deals damage, it's what you probably expect it to be. Now, different from the other classes, Necromancer has a specific set of skills that are called Macabre skills, which kind of seem like they would be a combination of defensive abilities and stronger cooldowns. First of all, Corpse Explosion, not really a cooldown, but it is Corpse Explosion. Oh my god, this has some of the most satisfying animations and sound effects ever. It's so brutal, so meaty, so gory, so visceral. Yes, this is exactly why you will play Necromancer, and I don't know if there will ever be a build that will not run this. I mean, I hope it will exist for the sake of, you know, build variety, but it's kind of core for a lot of Necromancer, and I do recommend everybody take it. Blood Mist is why I think that these are kind of defensive abilities. Essentially, what this does is you become immune for 3 seconds and you turn into a bloody mist. It reduces your speed a lot, and you deal very tiny damage in AoE, and you heal for a portion of it so far. It's okay. This actually gets way better with enhanced and actually specific legendaries, which is probably the main culprit of why you've seen Necromancers destroying the first wave of beta, but with the second wave of beta just around the corner, because this is recorded before that, it might change. And last but not least, Bone Prison. Again, another core bone ability for Necromancer, and it's really cool. You unearth a prison with a lot of life, and it surrounds a target area. It's a little bit better implemented in the Diablo 2 version, clearly, and you can even cancel it if you recast it. At least it was possible to do that on the beta. I would imagine that if for some reason this doesn't work that way, it should work that way, because you can actually trap yourself in or your allies in, unless you have like a blink or leap or teleport style mechanic where you can just jump outside of it. The next set of skills that you will unlock as the Necromancer would be corruption skills, kind of what curses are supposed to be. And you only really have 2 main abilities, Iron Maiden and Decrepify. Iron Maiden specifically will curse the enemy to make them take 10% of their damage that they deal to you, your pet, your allies, whatever, for 10 seconds. And of course, it will affect a big ground area, because that's how curses work. And Decrepify is very similar as well. You essentially afflict a target area, and enemies are slowed by 40% and deal 20% less damage for 10 seconds. This will, of course, well, actually, both of them will be augmented by a lot of passives and part of the corruption skills, although kind of all sections of your skill tree have passives. You will recognize some other long-last curses like Amplify Damage being an actual passive, not necessarily a curse, but these are the 2 that we at least will have access to through the skill tree. And it wouldn't be a Diablo 4 class without ultimate skills. Dude, I so like to say ultimate skills. Ultimate skills are essentially big DPS cooldowns. Not necessarily something that you're used to if you've been playing Diablo 2 and you just swapped to Diablo 4, but it's something that you might have found in Diablo 3. Now, whether we enjoy these big cooldown abilities or not, I think they're pretty much a part of ARPGs nowadays, and I'm only saying this because obviously the other classes have big cooldowns as well, but they seem essentially very big on Necromancer, considering that Army of the Dead has a 90-second cooldown, and it is Army of the Dead. It is what you think. You summon a lot of stuff. Well, actually, it depends on which inception of Army of the Dead you've played with in past RPGs. You essentially call forth the Deep Buried Dead. Volatile skeletons emerge over the next 7 seconds that explode when around enemies. So it's not like an actual army that you get to control, but it's more of a visual effect where you just detonate a lot of damage in the area in the form of actual corpses that rise from the grave, which is really cool. But of course, this will also be augmented by different style of modifiers and more that we don't even know of so far, since we don't have access to the full game. Blood Wave is interesting. It's actually a really cool ability. Essentially, you conjure a tidal wave of blood that deals a lot of damage and you knock back enemies. Very control-y, very on a shorter cooldown, but it is really fun to use when you're playing a caster-style Necromancer where you use all sorts of curses and blood abilities and corpse abilities, and you just throw them at your enemies and try to crowd control them as well. And speaking of, Bone Storm is something that's not really in Diablo. It's very reminiscent of World of Warcraft's Bone Storm ability from the Death Knight. You essentially summon a swirling storm of bones around you and your golem, by the way, which we'll get to in the summoning section, and you deal a lot of damage for 10 seconds to surrounding enemies. This obviously kind of reminds, when I look at it, reminds me of the Bone Armor from Diablo 2, but that was basically an armor. This is an actual damage dealing ability with whatever augments you put into it. Now, I specifically skipped the summoning part of this because it deserves its own section. And to start it off, obviously you have the baseline summoning abilities, the raised skeleton, which you start with any raised skeletons from a corpse by using this ability. If you have all of your skeletons summoning, if you summon another skeleton, you'll essentially summon a skeletal priest that will heal your skeletons for a certain amount, and it will also buff them to do more damage, which is really cool. We kind of really wanted an ability that also makes them target specific enemies like we've had in Diablo 3. I don't know if they're going to eventually do that or not. We don't have them so far, but even so, it's still really cool, and you can definitely go above and beyond in terms of number of skeletons. You'll of course also unlock skeletal mages, I think starting with level 15, that also do their own thing. They're the casters, they're, you know, very quintessential of the Necromancer toolkit. And lastly, the Golem at level 25, unless these restrictions change. This is how essentially you unlock them, and you do combat with them. They do actually take a skill point on your bar, so that's very, very weird because they limit about 3 of your active abilities that you can use in combat, so that's a little bit weird. But they do have an option to be sacrificed to give you increased stats, damage reduction, all sorts of effects, so you don't have to have them as an ability. But this is mostly tied into the Book of the Dead mechanic, which so far we haven't talked about each class's specific individual functionalities, like how Necromancer has the Book of the Dead, where you augment your skeletons. You use different style of skeletons, different number of skeletons, same with skeletal mages, same with the Golem. And since this is a pretty stuffy discussion to have, please let us know in the comment section down below if you want a video on the Book of the Dead, actually going through all the details that you need to know to understand this inner mechanics of the Necromancer, since it's probably too much to speak of in one particular video. But outside of all of this, as with all classes, you will have a plethora of passives, and I think, I might be wrong, but I think, because I haven't counted because I failed school, Necromancer has more passives than any other class so far. Fewer probably skills towards the bottom side of the skill tree, but a lot of augmenting passives that can change builds around, and I think this is pretty cool. Again, that's going to be up for a future video once the game releases when it comes to builds and how to build your Necromancer. But so far, this looks like a really fun class. It definitely feels like the devs have put a lot of effort into it, and is looking like probably the best version of Necromancer we've had so far. Is it the best for you? Do you think that this is the class that you'll start with? Obviously, in the themes of the videos, is this the best class for you? And when I say best, I don't mean damage, clearly, because skeletons and corpse explosions are just cool on its own and they don't need damage. They do need damage a little bit. Let us know. See you in the next one. Love you. Bye-bye.